Now, when it comes to business, it's important to realize that business houses are big. If you take the top 100 economies in terms of GDP and revenues, 60 are countries, 40 are actually business houses. So clearly, the trajectory which they decide to take on development, which hugely decide whether the development going forward is sustainable or not. Now, not only they are big, but if you see the major segments of concern, like say carbon emission, or usage of plastic, or usage of water, the segments which are responsible for this, whether it is power sector, whether it is industrial processes, whether it is just building or transportation, or even agriculture, everything, most of them are controlled by the businesses. So clearly, businesses have very important role to play. Now, traditionally, when a business was valued, it was always on the basis of what is called the accounting cash flows. Now, with the experience of last 2-3 decades, we are realizing that in those accounting cash flows, we have actually missed out a most important cost, the cost which is incurred in terms of the damage we have caused to the planet. But the good news is that whether it is investors, or it is civil society, or it is government, everyone is realizing this and have shown their commitment to work towards addressing this. The other good news is that if you see the last few years, number of corporates, number of business houses have actually given huge commitments. And there has also been a lot of action on the ground. Apart from this, investors today are valuing those companies much higher which are conscious on ESG, which can be seen from the market valuations. And then the good news is also on the technology. The technology is developing, and we do believe that at least 60 to 70% of the projects on the Cleantech sector are today viable because of sheer improvement in technology. So the trajectory is right, but then are we moving fast enough? There the answer is clearly that we are a bit late. When a carbon budget of only 8% is left, then probably what we are doing is something probably we should have done a decade back, or maybe even earlier. So given this macro scenario, what can be done to accelerate business actions so that we meet our sustainable development goals? In my view, there are 3 actions. I'm talking as a green investment banker, and based on my experience working in Tata Cleantech Capital, which I think are must-have. Of course, there are a number of things which are to be done. Some are good to have, some are must-have. And in my address, I want to talk about those 3 factors, which I think are indispensable. The first, I think, is clearly disclosures. Now, business houses today make a lot of disclosures. But when it comes to disclosure on sustainability, a lot of progress has happened. A lot of standards have been developed, which are great standards. GRI, TCFD, and now in IFRS has come out with a standard. But then those business houses are in minority. We know in practical life that something which is not measured is never monitored. So I think measurement is the key. And this is one area where regulations need to evolve, where the business houses need to show better intent in terms of improving their disclosure, whether it is on carbon footprint or plastic footprint or water footprint. They also need to invest a lot on the skill sets for this. Today, the skill set itself is not there. Today, if you go to a company, while their intent is to find their footprints, but they find it very difficult to get the manpower who can do it. So this is, I think, issue number 1. And related issue is that if you have found your footprint, the next step is clearly the abatement. Now here, I think, in general, things are clear. What is green, what is not green. But sometimes what is green can also be in the shades of gray. So it is important to have a uniform taxonomy so that we avoid the issue of greenwashing. And so that we are very clear what is green and what is not green. I think this is one step, which is a very basic step, and which needs to be taken. And if this step is taken, it will go a long way in accelerating business actions. The second issue I want to talk about is very fundamental of any macroeconomics, which is how do you price scarcity? If something is scarce, if what we can emit to the environment is scarce, then by common sense logic, it should be priced. Now here again, good news is that some countries have taken initiative. But at the same time, we have geographies where leave pricing, the carbon is actually subsidized. The carbon fuel is subsidized. So I think this is one area where probably it is in the realm of regulations, but something needs to be done. If we understand the scarcity of something, and if we price it, then definitely improvements will happen because technologies have developed. The third issue which I want to talk about is facilitating climate finance. Now today, the fact is that climate finance is not a macroeconomic issue. Because if we take global savings, they are upwards of $20 trillion or around that figure. And requirement for fighting climate change and for improving the climate in general, the planet in general, is the requirement of fund there is hardly $4 to $5 trillion, just about 25% of the global savings. So it's clearly not a macroeconomic issue. I think the key issue is that most of the savings we talk about are in the developed world, in the global north, while the requirement is in global south. So the issue is clearly the issue of capital flows. And we need to see how we can facilitate those capital flows. Now, when it comes to capital flows, the good news is that some of it will happen naturally because the technologies have developed and the projects are viable. So in my view, based on our research, we feel that out of this 5 trillion or so funds which are required, at least 60 to 65% will happen naturally if the projects are viable, and the projects are viable. But there are certain responsibilities which the developing countries will have and certain responsibilities which the developed world will have. When it comes to developing countries, we will have to see how we can ensure that ease of business is improved, how the contracts are properly enforced, so that capital flows by itself. Today, the hard reality is that whatever technologies we are working on have a very high capital cost. But at the same time, the variable costs are low because everything is based on nature. Sunlight is the natural resource, wind is the natural resource, tidal waves are natural resource. So the all cost is upfront. And that cost return comes over a long period of time. At the same time, technology keeps improving. So naturally, the technology of tomorrow will be of lower cost. But if the old contracts are reneged because of that, then probably capital flows will not happen. I think this is one area where one has to work. The other is, a lot of these projects take a lot of land. So how can we facilitate easy access to land? Then, if you have to do a development of project, you need manufacturing ecosystem. How can we develop manufacturing ecosystem? I think this is where Global South has to work on. When it comes to Global North, where we have huge savings, I think one thing should be very clear that the capital which is flowing naturally should never be taken as something which is coming because of their efforts. It's a capital system because of which capital is coming. I think where they can make a huge difference is funding those business models or technologies which are yet to develop. Funding those technologies. We are betting so much on green hydrogen, on carbon capture and storage. Seeing how these technologies can go to Global South, how can the business models be developed so that these technologies can be used? That is number one. Number two is that when these flows happen, they actually happen in dollars. Today, the ironical thing is that when they happen in dollars, the risk is being taken by those players, by those borrowers who don't have the ability nor they have the understanding of this risk. I'm talking about the forex risk. The requirement of all this money is in local currency because revenues are generated in local currency, but the money comes in foreign currency. And unfortunately, even the multilateral institutions, leave the international capital market, even the multilateral institutions, when they lend money, they lend in dollars. And in my view, this is a big policy failure. And this has led to huge defaults. And this will only go up if green financing takes momentum and the money goes in foreign currency to developing countries. Clearly, we need some solution for hedging. Today, while there's a huge hedging market globally, but that is concentrated in very few currencies. I think the developing world currencies hardly is 1% of the total trading. A lot needs to be done there. Can we think of some agency which will mitigate this risk? Can we think of some agency which will also do peripheral things like taxonomy and also guide nations on the quality of disclosure? Can we have something which will encourage venture capital for new technologies? I think these things are imperative. So these are my broad thoughts, which I think are must-have.